All right, welcome to day 2. Just a couple of quick announcements. Again, the speaker's bio QR code on the tabletops doesn't work, so please go to the website if you want to see speaker bios. We had a great film showing of The Lost Wolves of Yellowstone last night. We're going to show that. It was a great film. Yes, that was awesome. We're going to show that same film at Mountain Film in Laramie next week on Thursday, so tell your friends in Laramie to come join us. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started this morning. We're going to start with Scott Christensen introducing Arthur Middleton. Scott Christensen is the Executive Director of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. So thanks, Scott.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody back this morning. Having planned and pulled off a number of these conferences over the years, the ones that are multi-day, I think you always have this fear, like, are people going to come back the next day? So thanks for coming back. Thanks for being here. We've got a great program that Temple and others have put together. I get to introduce a good friend of mine this morning, Dr. Arthur Middleton. I've had the pleasure of working with him for the last many years now on a number of different issues here impacting Greater Yellowstone, but in particular, his background and expertise and leadership around wildlife migration stands out and has been really important to the conservation of this place. Arthur is a professor of wildlife management at UC Berkeley, where he studies how environmental changes affect wildlife behavior and populations. His recent work focuses on conserving wildlife habitat and reducing human-wildlife conflict. Middleton has shared his work with the public through outlets like National Geographic and the New York Times, and he's advised government agencies on conservation issues. Most recently, he was working with the USDA in the previous administration. He's the co-director of UC Berkeley's James and Kathleen Stone Center for Environmental Stewardship, and he received his master's degree in environmental management at Yale University and a PhD in ecology from the University of Wyoming. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Arthur Middleton.
Well, thanks, Scott. One of the, I think, real exciting things right now in conservation in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem is the quality of some of the leadership. And I think Scott, at the helm of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, has been a prime example of that, as well as many others in this room. I want to thank Temple, Stollinger, Jake Hoshard, and other organizers, University of Wyoming, the sponsors of this conference. I am a proud alum of the University of Wyoming, and this just makes me prouder. I think that this conference, and the interdisciplinarity of it and the tone of it just puts on display everything that's great about the institution, and I just love you all. Go Pokes! I am not Brian Nesvik. I'm taller, I've got more hair. I have less power and influence. So I'm sorry to disappoint you all, but having disappointed many an audience before, I'm good with it. I'll get by. That said, I've worked extensively with Brian in his previous roles. Brian was the Cody Region Supervisor in the Wyoming Game and Fish Department when I was a graduate student at the University of Wyoming. And so I'll discuss things that I think actually he and I have developed some shared vision on. And so I'm not here to replace Brian, but I want to try to, honor some of what we've worked on together through my remarks. And I was asked to talk about transboundary conservation in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. There will be a panel that unpacks this more later. There are several arguments I'm going to make. I'll try to just put them clearly up front. Wildlife are fundamental and integral to this conversation, how we define and conserve this ecosystem. Protected areas, look, we're in this incredibly well-protected landscape in many regards. Protected areas in federal, state, and tribal wildlife regulations have driven the recovery, an extraordinary recovery of America's most diverse assemblage of large mammals here in this landscape. But that same policy infrastructure, those same tools cannot protect and sustain this ecosystem's wildlife in the face of contemporary threats. And that's really important for us to recognize and address. So I want to talk about that. We need a new and improved approach, something more expansive. I think a lot of the elements of that are in place. I think there's sort of a movement afoot. I'll give some examples, but we got to scale it up and we got to break down some barriers to do that. And we need to do it rapidly. And I think a lot of people in this room have a role to play in that and are already playing a role in that. I'm going to be kind of biased to the migratory herds of ungulates in this ecosystem. That's what I know best. But I actually also think that they're really, really key in this moment to how we can approach this and think about this. So I just wanted to do like some quick, I know folks have been on field tours and other talks have done some of this, but I just wanted to kind of do some level setting, briefly about what I mean here when I talk about these wildlife of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem that are very special. We have 8 ungulates, including 6 that migrate seasonally. I don't have many slides. I don't know about you all, but I find making slides enormously time consuming. I'm trying to do less of it. You're part of my transition, but I will have a small number of slides. We have 6 ungulates that migrate seasonally: elk, mule deer, pronghorn bison, moose, and bighorn sheep. And then we have 5 large carnivores, a number of scavengers that range widely across the landscape, and to varying degrees actually depend or draw something important, from the abundance and the productivity of these migratory herds. So there's a set of connections there that are really important. And there are lots of other examples and species we could draw upon and talk about. This is my great friend, the artist James Prozek's work that I think he called just Yellowstone Composition 1 or something. And this was Yellowstone in a box, and the biodiversity here, and what if the park boundaries were walls, and causing us to try and think about the consequences of that. The wildlife of the Greater Yellowstone have diverse and really profound value to many people. Some of that is intrinsic or spiritual, values and reasons. In a sense, that's why so many people make a journey, from very far away to this place to see it and experience that. But, nothing illustrates the power of those cultural and spiritual connections better than, for example, seeing youth at Wind River Reservation, seeing buffalo, being released, for the first time in generations, or hearing about, elders being delivered a pound of, buffalo meat for the first time in so many years. And so they're incredibly potent, intrinsic, cultural, spiritual, values at play here. There are also instrumental and practical, reasons we value these wildlife. And a lot of studies have shown 70–80% of visitors give wildlife as a primary reason for visiting the national parks here. Wildlife viewing, my colleague Hillary Byerly Flint, I don't know if she's here this morning, maybe she's out there somewhere, estimated recently in a study that wildlife viewing generates something like nearly $600 million in annual recreational value in the 2 national parks. The chance to see a grizzly bear is a huge driver of that, and is hugely important even to businesses around the system. Hunter harvest, I don't have all the numbers here, but I pulled numbers from one recent year. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem had something like, just elk alone, 72,000 elk hunters across the 3 states, and the parts of the 3 states within the Greater Yellowstone. Harvested about 21,000 elk. Many of them, especially the out-of-staters, use guides. They stay in hotels, they go to restaurants, they engage with local businesses. My friend Taylor Phillips, who's here somewhere, has a thriving ecotourism business. That's a prime example. sort of I want to just take a closer look at some of what I've studied to sort of illuminate what it takes to think about conserving all this. I've worked a lot on these elk migrations. This is just an example of the movements of the Cody elk herd from private and multiple use public lands out on the Absaroka front, south of Cody, Wyoming, up into Yellowstone National Park on their summer range through quite a landscape here. This is just one little glimpse of that. You may be surprised to find out that there are 8 elk in the middle of this picture, and that's in one, spot of that 70-80 mile journey. I threw this in just to show, there are places on this trail that are carved into the mountainside from the hoof beats of these animals over however long they've been doing this. So you can see me and a friend walking along a rut in the mountainside carved by the Cody elk herd. And so this is something really, really extraordinary to get to experience. It's been, the privilege of a lifetime to me to be able to sort of experience some of the hidden lives of these animals. And so over time, working with a number of agencies, scientific colleagues, tribal fish and game, and others in the ecosystem, we've been able to stitch together sort of what this looks like as an ecosystem scale phenomenon. You have that Cody elk herd here, moving from winter ranges up into summer ranges into the park, and many of these other herds where these movements, these lines represent the movements of something like 20, 30,000 plus animals, just generating extraordinary productivity through this annual, pulse of movement in and out of that high country in core areas of the ecosystem. And, it's not just elk, of course, you have the mule deer, the pronghorn. And so, sort of zooming out from what I just gave you a glimpse of for the elk migrations here, you can see the well-known, path of the pronghorn from down in the Green River Basin up to very near we are in the valley here in Jackson Hole, where the movements of the longest known mule deer migrating herd between the Red Desert and the Hoback, and actually some of those individuals going as far up north as Island Park, Idaho, and the southwest corner of Yellowstone. But what I wanted to for the purposes of our discussion this morning, really show is like these sort of ownership and management ribbons that these animals move across to do their thing twice a year, which really are owned and managed by every kind of character and player you can think and name in Western land ownership and management. But what I want to highlight is the important role of private lands here, because there's a measure of protection and that comes with some of these existing protections that isn't necessarily there, even in the cases of great stewardship on private lands, of kind of a long-term protection. And that's 7 million acres of the ecosystem, 6 million, depending on how you define the ecosystem. 30% of the ecosystem is private. And so for the elk, that means maybe up to 80% of the winter, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the winter spent on private lands of Yellowstone elk herds that visitors expect to see in the summer. Or, the pronghorn herd I just mentioned, passes through private lands on a number of bottlenecks in parts of the journey. I think the mule deer I pointed to here cross the private lands of something like 50 owners on their journey. And so, and here is really the populations I've worked the most on. You can see the movements of elk and mule deer and bighorn sheep and pronghorn here around Cody, and in some cases up into the wilderness and the parks in the summer. And there's a similar picture around many parts of the ecosystem. And the thing about the situation on private lands is that it's not quite the same as it used to be. There's been a transition away from agricultural land uses into more amenity or recreational uses over recent decades, and that's arguably, and we're starting to see in the data, accelerating quickly. Why is it accelerating? Pandemics make people maybe want to live less in cities and more in away from other people. We have remote work, we have e-commerce, we have the ability of people to live closer to beautiful places and wildlife in a landscape like this. We have cultural, iconic films and TV shows that make it really exciting and appealing to do that. So we've got this set of forces that are driving a boom in development here in this ecosystem. And one recent study out of Montana State University, I think, predicted a couple decades ago maybe 180,000 new homes in the ecosystem by 2020. And the actual build out over that time dramatically exceeded that and was something like 220 or 30,000 homes. Now, some of those are in towns, that's fine, great. A lot of them aren't. They're out in rural places. That was before COVID and before some of these other forces truly being unleashed on the landscape. So development, more traffic with visitation and more residents, fences going up, more invasive weeds and rangeland degradation and fragmentation, new kinds of conflicts with wildlife associated with all that. And so, as I said, I'm leaning into the ungulates here, but we would, while the carnivores are different in many ways, there's a shared sort of dependence in many ways on this landscape, these private lands, and a shared perhaps set of approaches that are going to be required to form the relationships and implement the conservation, that needs to happen. So I'm just going to leave the map up because I don't have any more slides, and you can look at the map. So it's important to recognize progress. I mean, there's some real urgent challenges and threats here, but there's progress. Let's just take as a given that many of the protections that are in place, land protections, wildlife protections by states, feds, tribes, have brought progress, are being, even if haltingly, improved over time, and set that history and that legacy aside for a minute. What I want to recognize is recent progress to building a new model. We have extraordinary science from places like the University of Wyoming, from the agencies that have been working on it for decades, to be able to even have the opportunity to develop a shared vision and tools. We have a stakeholder base that actually is starting to understand this pretty well because of how that science has been communicated. And so we have agencies and nonprofits starting to prioritize this, bring this into their work plan, their strategic plans. There's some shared vision there. We have local organizing and initiatives, watershed level groups, and a bunch of the valleys now, local examples where I work in Cody, East Yellowstone Collaborative, or the Absorptive Fence Initiative, nonprofits and land trusts coming together, working more and more closely with landowners and others in the landscape. We have leadership and coordination at higher levels. Wyoming has this extraordinary thing of a governor who cares a lot about wildlife and has done an executive order saying we should figure out ways to protect more of these deer and pronghorn migration corridors in a process that we can follow to try and do that. That's something unusual in this country, actually, to have. We have agencies and coordinating bodies in this ecosystem, like the parks and the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, I think doing a lot better at acknowledging this, reaching out to states, more and more to tribes, more and more to landowners. And really importantly, we have tool building, demonstrations, piloting over several decades, land trusts like the Jackson Hole Land Trust, proving out easements and how to focus those more and more strategically for impact. We have pilots on short-term protections, habitat leasing, occupancy agreements, places like Property Environment Research Center and Western Landowners Alliance and GYC, you know, piloting and working on some of those. And we have advancing conservation practices and standards for things like wildlife-friendly fence or virtual fence or conflict reduction practices. And we've had some significant investments, like federal efforts like the USDA Migratory Big Game Initiative that was created recently, and leveraging other USDA programs like this Regional Conservation Partnership Program. That's led to more than $100 million into this landscape for easements and conservation practices and other things in partnership with landowners. We have private efforts like the Game and Fishes Department's partner, the Wildlife Fund, raising a pooled migration fund to pool philanthropic funds to help get some of this stuff on the ground, or Perks, you know, virtual fence fund, or the Ricketts Conservation Foundation has opened up an exciting opportunity recently on virtual fence. So there's this emerging movement. There's just wonderful progress, you know, all around the landscape, I think, in building out this approach. But we got to scale it up. And I think that requires recognizing and overcoming some real barriers. It's been said many times, what's needed of everyone engaged here is to build relationships and to build trust. You know, more partner community action, you know, engaged oriented work, emphasis on, you know, how to be more engaged with private landowners, with tribes, and kind of embracing some discomfort about how to work across lines that people have drawn, and exercise new forms of engagement and new kinds of conversation. I think finding vision and coordinating around it. We got a lot of great progress. Some of it can be piecemeal. How can we bring that together? And I think there's a need emerging to sort of bundle up what's needed, for example, in some of the corridors, gather the coalition that's already probably kind of out there, put a price tag on it, and do it. And that might cost $1 billion or $2 billion over a decade or two. I actually think that's achievable. What's needed of scientists like me? Get off campus, do what you all are already doing at the University of Wyoming, engage with folks, figure out how to find research questions and needs out with folks on the land and bring them back and use our capacity to answer those and address those. I think interdisciplinarity is really important. None of these problems can be solved by one field. How do we combine forces to answer questions and address challenges? I think agencies, we need a sense of urgency here. We need some risk taking from time to time. And I think, you know, to my friends in the Park Service, I'd say, and you already see we have a superintendent in Chip Jenkins who's already on this, you know, in a big way. Get outside the boundaries, use your bully pulpit and the respect you have with folks to rally new investments and to rally folks across the landscape to do this work. And we need the states. I mean, keep doing what they're doing, but really to persuade folks, like, habitat conservation is really critical right now. I mean, how can we rally the state's constituents around some of those really urgent needs? Conservation organizations is continuing to build relationships, working across ownerships, working across even these political divides that are really tough right now, and scale it up. You know, when there's a successful pilot project, how do we 10x it, you know? I think agriculture and industry, my friend Albert Summers says, folks need to recognize different shades of green. So a sense of like, hey, folks, open up. There's many people that want to partner actually and get good work done on the ground with you. And I think philanthropists in the business community, we need to get serious in a big way. And there's been some really important contributions by philanthropists and the business community so far. We need a lot more of it. And we need to have that conversation. Media organizations, we have journalism colleagues here, Christine Peterson and Michelle Nyhouse have heard me say this until they were tired of it, but like, it's not them, it's not those wonderful colleagues, but it's many others in journalism, like drive fewer wedges, like help us, shine a light on some success, on some people that are getting really great things on the ground. And I think we have international colleagues here, like help us change what Yellowstone is in the textbooks, like help get the message out that the Yellowstone model needs to be different and actually maybe is starting to be different, because that will help us here too. So let me wrap up. Wide-ranging wildlife, I think, can show us a path forward here. I've tried to gesture at some of that. I think we got to hold two ideas that are in tension in our minds at once, which is there's been a lot of progress in this ecosystem, and also there's some real urgent threats that we have to move to address in the very near future. And we just need all hands on deck, I think, right now to conserve wildlife habitat in this landscape in a good way. I think wildlife has shown us that the approaches that got us here, the Yellowstone model of conservation, has to be expanded, maybe disrupted a little bit or a lot. It's going to require breaking silos, building new and different relationships and coalitions, and trying some new things with a sense of urgency and ambition. I think considering all that's been accomplished in the past, considering all that I'm seeing accomplished by people in this room, considering the energy and talent and the young people here and in our community, considering what I've seen it with my own eyes in the places I've really done the deepest work in a few valleys around this landscape, I think something big is possible in the next several years in this landscape. But we got a lot of work to do. Thanks.
Arthur, you ran away before we had a chance to ask you a few questions. I think we have a minute or two if you want to take a few. Rebecca's got her. Rebecca, let me get you.
I had a question about conservation leasing. That was a component of the public lands rule that the Biden administration put out and was quite controversial. And do you see that as a tool of conservation leasing on federal land, or is it mainly for private land?
Yeah, I think it's a really good and important question, Rebecca. It's also fun to see you in a different context here. Right, that's true. Rebecca and I are on a board together, just to be clear. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll just candidly, I've been so laser focused on trying to see how we can develop the private land sort of habitat leasing model that I kind of have my head down and haven't dug deeply into the public land variant and opportunities. I thought it was exciting and pretty interesting that the BLM, attempted to advance that idea. I worry that it sort of got muddied and swept in to other controversies that surrounded it, and that we didn't get to have a good kind of conversation about how to implement these kinds of habitat leasing, conservation leasing tools on public land. So I think we need to figure it out. I think maybe the timing wasn't quite right. I think PERC which is well represented here, are sort of some of the leading thinkers on this. So I'd encourage you and others who are interested in it to really get with some of the PERC folks and learn more.